Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Beard, and I am a 1995 Los Angeles Core member. So I want to LA house. But I want to thank you all for choosing to come to this panel. It looks like we have a packed house. So this is obviously a topic that's at the forefront of all of our minds based on the children that we serve. So thank you for taking the time to participate in this panel. So I think we've put together some great group of diverse leaders to talk about their experience in regards to this topic. So I'm really excited to hear from them, and then we'll be able to take a few questions. So I just want to introduce our panel today as we get started. Laura Gaines, who's the Senior Counsel for the Office of Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education, and Saba Greta, Senior Counsel Office for Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education. Thank you for being here. Nancy Hanks, who's Deputy Assistant Superintendent Madison Metropolitan School District. Jalon McNeil, Managing Director, Schools First Project Director, Juvenile Justice Project of Louisiana. Curtis Palmore, Principal of Explore Schools, Brooklyn, New York. Nima Tahat, Principal, Oakland Unified School District. Charla Agnoletti, Community Advisor, Explorative Approaches Coordinator, Denver. So, we go as far back as 95, there, all the way up to 09. So I think we have a diverse group of experience and people up here that we'll be able to hear from too. Okay. So as you may or may not know, recently the Department of Education and the Department of Justice jointly issued some guidelines in regards to how educators can help reduce the disproportionate number of students of color that are receiving exclusionary disciplinary practices in schools. So in this session, our hope is to learn a bit more about the recommendations, hear from school leaders, as well as other leaders who grapple with challenges around positive school discipline every day. And hopefully by the end, we have sort of three basic objectives. And so our hope is that we'll understand the key findings and recommendations from the Department of Education and Department of Justice, which we're going to look at first before we get into the panel. Identify key contributors to the school to prison pipeline, as well as finally identify strategies that can be used to foster positive school culture, ensure that children of color are being treated fairly in regards to our school discipline practices. So thank you so much for being a part of this. At this point, I will, Laura and Saba are going to take us a little bit through the recommendations from the Department of Education and Department of Justice.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here and sharing a Friday afternoon with us on this important topic. This is an issue that's of great personal concern for Secretary Duncan, and one that he's asked our department to do everything we can to help address. And so we're really looking forward to talking a little bit about the problem as we understand it at the federal level and the resources that we've put out at the federal government, and then also to hear from all of the distinguished panelists about how this is playing out on the ground every day. So just to start us off, the starting point for us when we're thinking about this is we all care about having a positive school climate because it's good for kids, and we know that it's intrinsically tied to student learning and student achievement. We also know that a lot of schools are still struggling to create the kinds of positive school climates that can help students engage in really rigorous curriculum. And they're often relying very heavily on suspensions and expulsions in attempts to create safe learning environments. So just really to ground us kind of in the numbers, if you go to the next slide, we know there's research showing that the rate at which kids are being suspended and expelled has risen steadily and dramatically since the 1970s, and the percent of kids who've experienced suspension is almost double what it was in the 1970s. Many of you may be familiar with the Council for State Governments issued a groundbreaking report in 2011 called Breaking School Rules. They had done a longitudinal study of 1 million seventh graders in Texas over 6 years, from 7th grade to 12th grade. They found that 6 out of 10 of those students experienced suspension or expulsion at one point or in time during those 6 years, and 15% of them experienced discipline 11 or more times. So we have to ask ourselves how effective these practices are. But it's not that kids are doing more dangerous things today than they were back in the 70s. Actually, kids are being suspended for mostly minor non-violent offenses today. So, and there's certain groups that are being experiencing this type of discipline more than others.
Yes, so as an equity issue, we know that discipline is disproportionately affecting students of color. The office I work for, the Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Education, conducts a biannual survey of all schools in our nation. Civil rights data collection. It's what we really call the measure of equity health of our nation's schools. And one of the key factors that we measure is school discipline. So looking at this graph, and it's a little hard to read, school enrollments on the left-hand side, this left graph, and suspensions and expulsions are the other 4. And so we see here that Black students make up 16% of our school population, but range from 32 to 42% of suspensions and expulsions. So as you can see, are disproportionately bearing the burden of this new or emerging reliance on exclusionary discipline.
And so I know everyone's in this room again on Friday because we care about this. And why do we care so much? I mean, obviously there's kids that are, when you're not in class, you're suspended, you're losing instructional time. So that's obviously a contribution to student achievement. But there's also a host of research now that we have that shows the impact, the negative impact that this can have on students. So the students who are suspended are less likely to graduate on time. They're more likely to be suspended again. They're more likely to repeat a grade. They're more likely to drop out, and they're more likely to become involved in the juvenile justice system. There's also impact on schools and communities. Schools that have high rates of suspension have lower school-wide standardized test scores and student achievement. There's also suspensions, high rates of suspension, particularly when they're done in the context of zero tolerance. Policies can erode trust between students and faculty, which we know is really important for positive school climates and also for the kind of open communication that can prevent school violence incidents. Communities also bear steep direct and indirect costs associated with suspensions from the grade retention, from dropout, and from juvenile justice involvement.
So we wanted to share a small clip with you that shows what we feel is the long-lasting impact of exclusionary discipline on students. So the clip we're going to show is from a roundtable in Denver that is a roundtable conducted by my brother's keeper, and hopefully all of you have heard of that. It's the president's initiative to find new solutions to help men and boys of color succeed. So we'll take a listen to this, but we really feel like it really shows the effect that this can have on students. One second.
I feel like another problem in school is that there's too many harsh punishments for small things. This zero tolerance discipline. These are a real problem because it makes students feel like they can't trust staff, and it becomes a reason why you don't want to go to school. People think that's just happening in high school, and it's happening at a lot lower grades. And I personally experienced it in elementary school when I was ticketed for writing on the boys' bathroom wall. It was my first time with a police officer, and they gave me a ticket and a 5-day suspension. For this ticket, I had to go to community service, and I was definitely the only 11-year-old picking up trash on the highway. My family was honestly ashamed of me, and I was ashamed of myself. I didn't know how to protect my future until recently. On Tuesday, I had a career fair at my school, and I was interested in becoming a police officer and pursuing my goal of doing something like that. And I found out that you can't have a criminal record, and it killed my sense of hope.
So obviously, stories like this are what make us want to make sure that we have solutions for students. So just continuing on with the slides, sorry. Stories like this and the numbers that we've seen with civil rights data collection really pushed Ed to want to take action. So in January, as our moderator mentioned, the Departments of Education and Justice jointly released what we call a school guidance package. And there's 2 parts to the package. The first I'll talk about, which is the policy guidance, which really talks about school legal responsibility to not discriminate against students based on race, color, and national origin. That is prohibited under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And there's a second part, a resource package, which is really a combination of best practices, of school laws that we found across the state that really are intended to help districts, schools, and stakeholders really tackle this issue. So I'll quickly go over the boring legal stuff, but which is really important, and which is really the bulk of the work that we do at OCR. So Title VI protects students from any type of racial discrimination. So specifically in school discipline, when you think about that, that means students are protected from discrimination in any aspect of the school day. Extracurricular, after school activities, on the bus, at any time they're being discriminated against. Title VI covers that. And importantly, especially for school leaders in the room, Title VI actually covers any employee that's under school control. So if you contract out your discipline services to a school resource officer, it doesn't matter if they're working for a different company. If your school is in control of that school resource officer, they also are covered under Title VI. And any discriminatory act that school resource officer commits is also considered to be an act that your school is committing. So there's two ways that we look at discrimination in school discipline, and I'm sure some of this will sound familiar to you. First is different treatment. So that is simply when students of different races are being treated differently based upon their race. So we are disciplining Latino students for something, but we're not disciplining Black students for something. The other approach that we look at is disparate impact. This is the one you're probably more familiar with, and that's when a school district has a facial neutral policy. So for example, tardiness gets you an out-of-school suspension. It doesn't say anything about what color the student has to be, but it ends up disproportionately affecting one group of students. And as that graph I showed you demonstrates, we often see that, for instance, zero tolerance policies can have a disproportionate effect on Black and Latino students. So no one intended for that to happen, but it's having an unjustified impact on one group of students, and that's still considered discrimination under Title VI. So a couple of examples just to illuminate this. So this is a real case from OCR. So this is a real district. This really happened. Different treatment. So first, we found in our investigation of this district of an African-American kindergartner who pulled the fire alarm. It went off. That's a 5-day out-of-school suspension. Disturbing that she's in kindergarten and still got 5 days suspension. Similarly, an 11th grade African-American student lifted the cover on the alarm and went off. Same violation. He also received a 5-day out-of-school suspension. But in contrast, we saw a 9th grade white student who hit the fire alarm, same violation, fire alarm went off, and he only received a 1-day out-of-school suspension. So as you can see here, and none of the students had prior disciplinary history. So none of them had done anything wrong, they all did the same thing, but one student got something different based on his race. Disparate impact is a little bit different. Disparate impact, as you can see, in one of our cases, the school had a violation called use of electronic devices. I'm sure you guys are all very familiar with that rule in your school. Don't use cell phones, tablets, something like that. The investigation showed that school officials were regularly using this, and that Black students were using these devices at a higher rate than other students. So as a result, we saw that Black students were getting suspended more often than other students. So as you can tell, this is different because there's no one who's going out with the intent to make sure that Black students are getting disciplined more often, but it's having that effect on Black students. So when we investigate, we ask the school, is there an educational justification for this? Like, is there a reason why we're seeing this happen? And the school will come back and say, we really want to make sure students are focused and they're paying attention in class, and we think we need to have this violation. We need to have this offense in our code of conduct. But we'll say, look, this is obviously having a bigger effect on Black students. Is there an alternative that you can come up with? And that's what we did with this district. We worked with them to come up with an alternative strategy that would get to that educational purpose that wouldn't have that effect on African American students. Just quickly, if your district happens to be investigated by OCR, it does happen. We get almost 10,000 complaints a year, several of them are for school discipline. These are the things that we look at. We want to look at your discipline records. We want to see our teachers treating kids the same way, because we actually would go into districts and see bad things written on discipline reports, like Black kids are always doing this or something like that. And you actually can see that kind of stuff being written down. We want to look at your school discipline data. Numbers are never going to be the whole story, but sometimes the data is a starting point for us. We look at interviews with students and parents. We have heard, as you can imagine, harrowing stories of students being treated differently based upon their race, or students like the student you saw in the video who have endured really just unjustified, the overuse of school discipline. We'll also look at code of conduct to make sure that it's clear and that students and parents have a clear picture of what it means to be violating the rules. If any of you work in California, actually you're very familiar with the willful defiance rule, which is a huge category of offenses, which just didn't give students any information about what they might be doing wrong. And so when we see something like that, when it's so subjective that teachers can use it for any type of behavior, that's a warning sign to us that the code of conduct needs to be more clear. And then we want to make sure that your school has safeguards to make sure that this discrimination is not happening. So is the principal looking through referrals after they get them from the teacher? Is there some check and balance on the way the school discipline is being administered? And then finally, stop talking, when we do find that there may be discriminatory conduct in a district, we work with the district to make sure that we can come up with a remedy that can address the problem. So for example, in Oakland in 2012, we signed a landmark agreement with the district because we saw that Black students were being disproportionately disciplined in the district. So for example, we asked the district to implement climate surveys. We asked them to create discipline forums for parents and guardians to tell schools how they were feeling about the discipline procedures. We pushed them to make data collection a bigger part of their school data collection. And then finally, some of you might know that we encouraged them to create a mentoring system for African American students to make sure that there were alternatives for African American students who may have been disciplined for certain offenses.
So the second part of the package that we released in January, along with the OCR Department of Justice legal guidance, was this package of resources for schools and districts and states that were thinking about trying to take on the challenge of improving school climate and school discipline. The first is a guiding principles of reform document that draws from emerging research and best practices and identifies key principles and action steps to guide this work at the local level, a directory of federal resources, and a compendium of state laws and regulations. I'll just briefly talk about these. The first principle in the guiding principles document is climate and punishment. This one's pretty self-explanatory. We want to prevent this behavior before it happens and intervene in constructive ways to support struggling students that misbehave. Just two sort of basic examples. In Cleveland, we've seen they added social emotional learning component to the curriculum there. In Denver, another piece of the climate and prevention is, of course, setting up the appropriate framework of training staff and making sure all staff, which includes any school-based law enforcement officers, are appropriately trained in how to interact with students and what their proper roles are. And so Denver is another example. Denver Representative Hill, but had a great memorandum of understanding between the school district and the police about what the proper role is of SROs, school resource officers in the schools. They're focusing on safety, not disciplining children, and not. The second principle is about clear, appropriate, and consistent expectations and consequences. When we talk about improving school discipline, we don't mean not having discipline. We want kids to be held to really high expectations, and we want proportional and developmentally appropriate consequences in place that can help guide them to learn from a mistake if they make one. So another example in Chicago, actually, maybe you've been following the news just last month, they've approved a new code of conduct. They've actually limited the suspensions for pre-K students. I mean, it's not shocking, but actually a lot of schools do suspend children in pre-K through second grade. They set specific criteria for the suspensions in the upper grades, and they remove some of the vague offenses that Saba mentioned. The third principle is about fairness, equity, continuous improvement. Excuse me. There's very significant legal obligations here. Staff should have training and understand those. And we want schools to really think about using data and a collaborative process with parents and students and staff to look at what's happening in the district and in the schools, and then make changes and adjust as necessary. So Baltimore is a good example. They have real-time sort of school climate profiles that they feed in disaggregated data. They look at that constantly. They identify schools that need additional help or more intervention. The next piece of this package was a directory of the extensive federal resources that are available. There are a bunch of different types of research. There's different surveys that you can access, trainings and webinars. We had a whole series of webinars that sort of explains a lot of this in more detail. Some of the settlement agreements that are come out of the work that the Civil Rights Office does, and some specifically for teachers and principals. And the next one is state law. This is an online tool. If you want to know more about the laws in your state, the discipline laws, it's a very local issue. So you can search by state, you can search across other states to see if you want to see how other states handle mandatory expulsions, for example, you can do that. So those are the pieces. And
So just quickly as we finish, we just wanted to talk about a few ways that we think the guidance package can be helpful in your work, and so a few questions that we think are important to answer at the school and district level. So for example, just running through these school climate surveys and OCR's work, we found those to be extremely helpful, just to literally find out how parents and students and teachers are feeling about the school discipline framework at their school. As we've mentioned several times, making sure the school handbook is very clear, making sure that, as the guiding principles suggest, that parents and teachers are being engaged in the formation of school discipline policies. And then data, we just really can't emphasize enough the importance of schools being aware of their own data. So the CRDC, for example, if you are in charge of doing that for your school, make sure you turn it in, make sure your school knows what the results are of it when you do turn it in. And then in terms of leadership engagement, a lot of times we'll find that folks at the district level or at the charter school board level just aren't even aware that there are alternatives to suspension and expulsion. And we'll hear from our esteemed colleagues that there are many others: restorative justice circles, alternative community service, peer mentoring. There's many, many other ways that you can turn a discipline incident into a teachable moment for kids. So teachers who have all that knowledge can educate up to the school board level. Again, data. Again, so a lot of times school board members aren't even aware of what's happening at the school level in terms of incident data. And then, is there training opportunities for principals and for other school district leadership on school discipline alternatives? And specifically, as Laura mentioned with the school law compendium, do people at your school know how to do an expulsion hearing? If you're looking at a charter school, for example, do they know all the rights that students have in a hearing? Because the more that you do at that step to make sure the students' rights are protected, honestly, is the better of the school climate that you're going to have when students feel that they've been respected through that process.
I think we can skip this one. I think we've kind of gone through, but if you go to the last slide, there's just ed.gov/school discipline has a bunch of resources, and actually we've got some postcards that we'll pass out that have where these you can find more information. So there's a lot more on there. But we want to move to the real life examples. Thanks.
Thank you.
Know as a school, at least in my school, that at least 80% of all of our referrals and incidents that go onto suspensions and expulsions happen inside the classroom. So that means that we have to be really working with teachers so that they know they're the #1 gatekeepers, and giving them the tools and the power to always be in the mindset to have sort of a restorative dialogue, working with students to think about what happened, who did it affect, and what are you going to do to fix it, so that we're constantly working with our students in disciplines, holding them accountable, and really helping them come up with sort of like self-sentencing in a way to come up with logical consequences that hold them accountable to keeping a safe and positive community.
Hi, I think for us, it's just a fundamental principle that teaching behavior is a part of what we do in the school district. We don't deal in discipline, we deal in behavior education. In the same way you teach literacy, you teach math, you teach science, teaching behavior has to be a fundamental part of what you do at the school level. We have hidden curriculums we were talking about earlier in our schools, where we expect students to come to us and know what to expect and know, certain norms and certain ways to behave without explicitly telling them what that is. And then when they don't respond to that, then we discipline them. So we just believe that fundamentally it is your role as a district and as a school to elevate the importance of teaching behavior to the same level of your academic work.
I agree 100% with Nancy, and for me, it's basically 3 areas as a school leader in New York. First and foremost is teachers. I believe that teachers are the ones that can create those engaging, exciting lessons, those rigorous lessons that eventually, I believe, keep kids engaged and hopefully away from any of the discipline issues that schools deal with. Secondly, as Nancy was saying, really take some time and invest in teaching all stakeholders about your expectations. And that means parents to community members, the tutors, obviously kids and teachers, but it's important that every stakeholder knows what that expectation is and that you support them to meet those expectations. And then to my last point is that my experience, honestly, like 85–90% of kids meet expectations, and the percentage that does not meet those expectations, those are the kids that you have to invest a lot of time and energy into and resources.
Good afternoon. So for us at the Juvenile Justice Project in Louisiana, those of us who work with kids for whom many of the systems that they work in, and those systems have fallen apart. And so my general philosophy, or the philosophy of the JJPL, is with regard to anything in school, the guiding principle should be to create policies that are generative, that are positive, that are productive, and not destructive. Because many of our kids live in systems that are really anti them and anti their success. And so we need schools that are really focused on that word positive. And so if we're thinking about systems and policies in schools, if it creates a negative impact, it really can't be positive. So if we focus on that word positive and creating productive, healthy policies for kids, then we'll see the difference in the way in those outcomes.
Everything they all said, pretty much. Mostly what Nancy and Curtis talked about, Joe. I'd say in Garfield we saw a significant decrease in our suspension numbers, mostly when we adopted the PBIS model. And essentially that's teach them what you expect, right? Recognize those who do it and kind of keep that momentum going. And to Curtis's point, that'll get you about 80%. And then really invest in an intervention structure for that other 20%. I'll talk more later about a social emotional curriculum and how in Garfield we invested our adults as well. But that has been the biggest change. A few years ago when I took over Garfield, I was sitting in a room like this, kind of asking questions. And once we adopted the PBIS model, we started seeing some significant changes in our school.
A little time.
I think we just sort of shared it, but prevention, I mean, starting any disciplinary incident, there's a lot of things that happen, a lot of hard work, way before that moment when there are choices made of, how to react to something and putting in place a structure and using PBIS and other evidence-based strategies to prevent misbehavior before it occurs.
And then just quickly, because I work for CR, the importance of collecting and studying, analyzing, and reacting to your data. If you don't know you have a problem, it's going to be impossible to address it.
Awesome. All right. For this one, I'm going to address for Curtis, Nima, and Charlotte. For you three, and no more than 3 minutes. What systems or strategies have you implemented at your schools in order to improve your disciplinary practices?
So we just ended year 1 of implementing restorative justice at our school in Denver. And just a little FYI, the kid in the red was part of an organization called Padres y Jóvenes Unidos, which is Parents and Youth United, which has done a lot of work to forward restorative justice in Denver, so check them out. One of the way I like to think about the way we've done things at Bruce is sort of like we have 2 wings of a bird that keeps us in balance when it comes to discipline. And like was said, we have preventative practices and we have responsive practices. So those preventative practices are, we do connection circles where we're teaching our behaviors. We're giving youth a chance to lead youth and step outside of standards-based curriculum. And we're doing like school-wide events. We do PBIX at our school, all of those things. And what they really do is that preventative work creates a sense of community. Because if our students don't feel as if they belong to anything, or don't have any sense of pride or stake in the community, then there's never going to be anything to restore. And so then on the other wing, we have all of our responsive practices. We obviously are adapting a model of restorative justice, where a lot of what we do is either students know through these circles, the preventative circles that we do, that they can come to us if they know that they're going to fight, if there's a conflict going on, and we'll do, as was mentioned, a restorative justice circle or a mediation, where we're going through those same questions that we're asking teachers to use in the classroom, which are what happened, who did it harm or affect, what are you responsible for, and then how are you going to fix it. We also use that process oftentimes in lieu of or sort of hand in hand with a suspension, because we know that suspension and expulsion isn't working to stop our students from reoffending, so that they're or getting suspended again, keeping them in school, all these things that were mentioned, so that we have to keep them in our classes. It's also an evolution. So some of the things that we've seen in terms of restorative justice practices that are really working in schools that we're not doing yet at Bruce is a lot of peer mediation, like was mentioned, training your older students to help in those restorative processes, help stop the conflicts before they start, and then also something which is called like a justice panel or a fairness committee, where a teacher or students can sort of refer somebody to this panel, and then you have student leaders who are helping them go through that process and helping them sort of like the self-sentencing arena.
So I'm the founding principal of the School of Brooklyn, where I've adopted 85% of my kids from a failing school that was actually listed in New York City as one of the most dangerous schools because of the high level of suspensions. And I was really fortunate in my planning year, I got a chance to observe the school and see things that were going on in that school. So when I started the school, I actually took a pretty different approach to support some of the friends that we love the most that you probably know who I'm talking about in your schools. And what we did was we basically started this program called First Academy. Our core values are follow directions, integrity, respect, and teamwork, which stands for FIRST. And we started a separate class to support those students. And it was in a class where off the back you got placed into that class. We actually started the class at the end of October and gave all of our kids in our school an opportunity to really be trained about our expectations and hopefully meet those expectations. And if they did meet those expectations, we transferred them into this class, and the scholars in those classes received extra counseling. They got really personalized experiences to help them become successful. And over the year, we had 36 scholars that went through that program that eventually mainstreamed back into their classes. And I found that I really didn't need that program moving forward, so I don't have a program at my school anymore. And I think what I learned from it was that I actually can help those kids to be successful by making sure that my teachers are trained at a high level to do the exact same type of work that we were doing at First Academy. And the other thing that, I'm not going to promote like a specific package program like PBS or Second Step. Those are two I think you should look at. But it's really about getting to know kids. And what I do is like this year, 94% of my kids met expectations throughout the year, as our data shows. That 6% got a lot of love. And I mean that literally. Like we make sure every term we are working aggressively, as Nancy was talking about, to make sure that those kids are getting home visits, they're getting lunch dates with me, or lunch bunch with me, or other leaders and teachers in the school. We're making sure that those scholars are supported academically, because we know they act up in math class because they struggle in math, and that's the reason why they're not participating. And that's the stuff that I think is eventually going to get me to a point where I'm probably at 98%. And I know my 2% are going to be the ones that are going to be amazing kids that are going to struggle, but they're eventually going to still meet our goal long term.
Awesome. When I took over Garfield in 2010, we were a pretty toxic school, very low performing. And from just interviewing staff to get an idea of what's it going to take for us to be great, I learned, things that they would share with me. Staff here don't know how to treat each other. The kids are off the hook. They're crazy. It's chaotic. And what I found interesting was the staff never implicated themselves. They were never like, I'm one of the people who doesn't know how to treat people. It's like everyone else here, they're crazy. So that was step one. Step one, if you're doing any kind of turnaround work, is the adult culture. So we took that whole year. My first initiative was adults in this building are going to treat each other with the utmost respect. We're going to spend a lot of time on visioning, norming, really talking about who we want to be, because we're the first role models. Their kids are looking at us. So if adults are talking about adults yelling at each other in the halls, we got to stop that. And I got to do that because I came as a new principal to just call it out and say, we're not doing this anymore. You told me you don't want to do it, so we're not. that was step one. Step two was bringing in a social emotional curriculum. So really acknowledging that part of our job as educators is not just the academics, but it's also caring for the social emotional needs of our students. And that spoke to a lot of the staff. I think there's few teachers who wouldn't agree that you gotta get to the social emotional piece if you're gonna get to the academics. So staff were really excited and on board for that. We chose to use a curriculum called Caring School Communities. I think it's good, but I don't think it's the thing. But I would say some curriculum is necessary. And we got training, and it was part of a district initiative, which was great. And then the last piece for us was bringing in PBIS. So we took care of the adult culture, take care of actually starting to see our students and give them voice, take care for their social emotional needs, and then building in the structures that come with PBIS, which it could be any other program, that's just what I happen to know. But it's just so explicit about what you teach, what you reward, and then getting to the 15 or 20% that need the help. And with that 15 or 20%, I think most schools have this, but we have a cost team, so coordination of services, some people call it a care. But that's where we look at referrals with our referral data from PBIS, but also referrals from teachers. Like, hey, I've got this kid, they're having a hard time. And we would examine those and then we would align services. So this student should be in counseling, they need some help. Oh my God, this student had a recent death in their family, what can we do to help them out? Really getting very specific, because when you get to that 15 or 20%, it's not just a Band-Aid, it's something much more intensive and it's gonna need a lot of adult support.
And I was gonna ask, some people that don't know what that is, can you tell us what the acronym is for?
Yeah, so cost coordination of services team. So
But, no, I'm sorry, the PBIS.
Oh, I'm sorry, PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention and Support. You can go to pbis.org. It's RTI based, so it's all about the pyramid and 80% and 15% and 5%.
What was that? What was the curriculum you used? The name of it again?
Caring School Community, and that's from developmental studies, and it's just kind of like scripted. It's about a lot of class meetings, a lot of teachers facilitating giving students voice. And so it creates a space for students to talk about hardships at home, shootings in the neighborhood, just whatever they bring into the classroom that we don't take the time to acknowledge, really just giving them the time to process it, because we're not going to get counseling for every student. That doesn't mean every student doesn't really talk about what's going on in their lives.
All right, thank you.
And this question is for Nancy, I've gotten to know Nancy a little bit about the work that she did at her school in Chicago. She did some amazing things to create a great culture there. But now that you're in the district role, my question is more in your role from a district management perspective. What themes or trends emerge when you think about schools in your district that are engaging in this work that are really effective compared to the ones that are struggling?
So it definitely starts with the principal. The principal has to really believe and commit to this work. In September of last year, we started the process of completely revamping our code of conduct, which we don't even call it that anymore. It's the behavior education plan. And it was interesting. The principals were really behind it, at first. This is great. You should really take this on. And then we said we're going to eliminate suspensions in elementary schools. And they went, really? So, it's interesting when you put that on the table, you start to see who really believes in the work and who doesn't. And so the principal has to be able to really get out front and champion this work with their staff. Because if they don't believe it, then it'll completely undermine any efforts at the school level. The principals, they also invest heavily in professional development, but specifically around race. In our district, we have 19% African American students that make up 60% of expulsions. That is not about restorative circles. That is not about PBIS. That's about adult behaviors and how that plays out in school discipline. And so the places where we see this work actually not just tackle suspensions, but also disparities. And disproportionality are the places where they invest in talking about implicit bias and how that plays out in decisions. And really having tough, difficult conversations about who is getting suspended, who is getting detentions, who decides what is disrespectful and what is not, and by whose standards is that criterion set. So the places that I see that really do a good job at that, they get real about race and about bias. They also develop, they direct their resources to it as well. Your time, your money, your people have to be focused on doing this work. At the district level, we devoted $1.5 million to it because we wanted to let them know that we were serious about giving them the tools, but also wanted to make sure that they were also really looking at how they use their professional development time, how they use the people in their school to also support this work as well. But really, I can't underscore enough also the use of data when it comes to those conversations. They look at this data regularly. They disaggregate it based on race, based on socioeconomics. They look at it classroom by classroom, area by area of the school, and it's built into their kind of review cycles. So their SBLTs, whatever the school-based leadership teams that they have, it's on the agenda monthly, if not more frequently than that, if they need to be. And when they need to have tough conversations, they don't shy away from them, but they lean into it.
All of that. We're talking about kids who've been in and out of the juvenile and criminal justice system, so we have to start asking ourselves who we say are allowed to be in our classrooms and in our schools, and that's across the board. The data right now is really only reflecting racial gaps, and I think we have to expand that to look at other differences that we have within kids in the population. So in terms of how kids feel, right, I think you probably already know the answer to that. So if you feel like a process that happened to you in school felt good, then you'll feel good, right? And so some of these things that we're hearing from the principals and from Nancy is that you implement processes and practices in schools where kids feel safe, they feel like the process worked, they feel like they have a say in it, they feel respected, they feel like they have a stake in what has happened. These processes create accountability and support for kids. We have a thing on our website, www.jjpl.org, called Models of Success. So we're looking at the schools that are doing school discipline well in New Orleans. And one of our principals said when they started using restorative practices in schools, he saw a return of hope and joy, not just in the kids, but in the parents and in the staff that worked in the school. And so we're thinking again about positive school cultures. It has to be grounded in a couple of things, and one of those things is joy and hope and love. And we all have to be courageous enough to lead differently in this arena where it's really based on love. And the work that we're expanding into in terms of JJPL is thinking about this question differently, right? So let's stop focusing on the consequence. Let's start asking ourselves, why do we have these rules to begin with, right? So why do we have an extreme zero tolerance policy for uniform violation? Why do we have, and I think you guys mentioned it in the data, like why do we have a preschooler being suspended or expelled for pulling a firearm, right? Like, so let's start examining our own ideas about behavior and the rules that should govern behavior before we even get to the consequences. So in terms of advice, right? Lots of advice. So one, contact the Juvenile Justice Agency or the Department of Children and Family Services in your area. There are a lot of social service organizations, nonprofit organizations who are connected with those two services, like myself, the Juvenile Justice Department of Louisiana, that want to help teachers, district schools to get a broader context of the kids that we're working with. And when we talk about training for teachers and districts and school leaders, these are the folks that can offer free or low-cost trainings to your schools, right, to continue that professional development. Inspect what you expect. So if you are a school leader or a teacher, this is about the data again. If you're doing academic interventions, you would look at the data. So look at the data around, behavior in your school and create interventions. If you can't do that inside of your schools, there's plenty of experts to help you. Jalon McNeil at Yahoo. Because we pay the money for academic interventions, right? So it's time to start putting the resources where the resources belong as well. And there's plenty of folks, Jalon McNeil at yahoo.com, that are credentialed and competent in helping schools create those kinds of positive reactions in schools. Yeah, that's
John, can you actually say the website again? Say it a little slower.
www.jjpl.org. Go to resources, and you'll see suspensions matters, because they do. It's a public education campaign that we started for Louisiana, and it talks of, and it has interviews with schools and school leaders and people who are using different alternative practices in schools. This isn't speculative fiction here, right? We know what works for kids. Again, we just have to have the courage to do it.
So this question is for Laura and Saba. We know principals obviously are overwhelmed with managing schools, instructional leadership, and a variety of different things. And they can feel overwhelmed by the suggestions to spend even more time tracking data around discipline and family, because they focus so much on either whether they're trying to turn around school or take the school to the next level. What suggestions would you offer school leaders who just feel overwhelmed and sort of don't know where to start to make this manageable for their staff and for the community and for the school?
It's a fair point, and there's a lot going on in schools, and this year in particular, the Common Core and all of the different initiatives that our schools are implementing. But and I would love to hear from the school leaders at the table. But for Mark, it goes back to the very first, our starting point, which is that safe schools and having productive learning environments are absolutely essential for student learning and student achievement and positive outcomes for kids. So these are tools, data, and engaging parents. The research shows that parent involvement can really help improve behavior challenges for kids. And data is another tool that is, what Belinda said, is the same way you use that to track progress and improve on academics. The behavior environment of the school is absolutely critical for any part of the curriculum that needs to have attention. So those are tools that are essential. But we are here that.
I guess I would just add that this isn't something principals should be taking on their own, and I'm sure that the teams will have more to say about this, but this should be something that permeates the school culture, so teachers should be part of this, parents definitely part of this. I've seen schools where students co-create those concepts and are part of that process of determining what they want their school culture to look like, so it really shouldn't all fall on the principal. It should be a school-wide, community-driven process.
Yes, sir.
So one of the things with the PBIS program is the data was actually really cool. The staff loved it, and I liked it a lot, because if you do the referrals right, you have the time, the location, the incident, what happened, you can get data reports that actually show you like what is the thing you refer for the most. And then our school was fighting. It's like, oh, we kind of knew that, but good to know that it's like 2-to-1 fighting, and it's happening mostly at the yard, happening mostly at recess. If we get that fine-tuned on the data, then it's like, okay, we need more adults on the yard in morning recess for 4th and 5th grade. Great. We kind of thought we knew that, but now we really know it. So there's a lot of investment, but you just need to have that data system in place. If you're trying to do it on an Excel spreadsheet yourself or something like that, that's not the way to do it.
Just to add one other piece, I co-sign 100% about the data piece. It helps see bright spots and what there's. Just in terms of engaging families, one of the things that we've done over the last 2 years is that we once a month sit down with a group of parents, and they sit down with me and other school leaders and the dean of students frequently is at that meeting, and we ask them their opinions about our policies. And I feel like I've gotten some of the most honest, critical feedback that I literally have placed into my action plan a few weeks ago for our improvement of our school, and it's because of the opinions of these parents. And I would strongly encourage the school leaders and so forth that's in the room, make sure you're getting those families with kids who struggle in your school at that table. Like, they have to have a voice, and they have to be a part of the discussion when you're thinking about best ways to support those kids.
So this is what I'd like to do this time. You guys are doing really good. We're actually ahead of time. I think they put me as a facilitator, so I wouldn't talk so much. I've never You guys are doing great. So I'm gonna open it up. I know we have a variety of diverse group of people that are here in this session. So the way we're gonna do the rest of the panel is we're gonna open it up now to some Q&A. I'm gonna try to diversify the questions. And then we're going after the Q&A, we're gonna close out. I'm gonna give every panelist, I have a final question for them and we'll close out, okay? So if you could just say maybe your name, what you're currently doing, and then your question.
My name is Taylor Howard. Good afternoon. I teach 8th grade social studies in San Antonio, Texas. So you're my third year at the same school. So my principal, for the most professional setting, to say this is a negative enforcer of behavior. And so what I mean by that is she's like yelling on megaphones throughout hallways. She's like cussing out kids. Unfortunately, all the things that are marked in your blood and hair. And the school district is aware of this, but like they're just like, oh, like she's like, whoa, she's just like crazy, so we're just like not gonna deal with her. People call me to HR, yeah. I think like I'm saying at our school because I don't know kids. So like I need to be a positive partner and like this behavior management without unfortunately being able to go to my principal and say like, oh, okay, let's like try to make the kid a hug instead of like saying this. And so like my question for you all is like as someone who's in a position where the leadership unfortunately is not on board with this. What do you do? Right? So like what are some advice that you have for me as a teacher who's in love with my kids, who I'm not losing my kids, but I need to help my school culture with this behavior. And there are other teachers who are willing to be on board, but it's not this word.
So can you do it again, like specifically question? Just what do what?
So
You said a lot. You got a 30 minutes?
So, I mean, all of us in our placement schools, we seek to work in under-resourced communities. Sadly, many of us have worked with principals like that, and so have I. I would strongly encourage you to do two things. First of all, know you have control over the X amount of kids that you work with, and like make sure that you are going above and beyond to service those kids and scholars every single day. Be the beacon of light that you can for those kids. And then I do think you should think about suggestions, and even though your principal's off the hook and like doing sad things, like I really think that you should think about maybe an assistant principal, maybe a guidance counselor that you can like maybe make some suggestions about the things that we're talking about doing. I know when I taught in my placement school, like we did a book study on savage inequalities back in the day, and like we actually, like myself and the other TFA teachers in the school started like thinking about what we can do in Manhattan and Harlem to like ensure that those scholars in Washington Heights, to ensure that those scholars are like really given opportunities that are going to get them to be college ready. So I would encourage you to do those two things.
You can start grassroots. I mean, you can start with the teacher team, you know, and work from there and let the kind of pressure start at the bottom and then swell up. You know, for a lot of people, that's all they know. You know, when you know better, you should do better. And a lot of times, if they have not seen it done another way, then they think that the Joe Clark way of managing the school that they grew up seeing on Lean On Me is the only way that you can get it done. But as you start to experience success, and it starts with your team and then another team, and then there's data to support it, you can say, hey, there is actually another way to do that. We need more teacher leaders to really do that, because it won't always come from the administration. And then tell them about
I'm gonna go here, and then I'll come back over this. Okay, so here. No, we're going to the back. There. I'll remember. So go ahead.
All right, I'm a new school culture in Detroit, Detroit Schools High School. Kind of two questions. One, I deal with a lot. My staff is I don't work like a TFA placement school anyway. The average experience of my staff is about 15 years. I'm doing a lot of like fixed mindsets in terms of how to respond to students' behaviors. So it's just like a line outside my door of kids that they want to send to me. And I've actually gotten grieved by the media reps for not suspending kids because they feel threatened by them. And they're not really keen on using these newer systems, right? So in terms of what my no excuses culture, but have had a lot of academic success with that model of very high suspension rates. So I'm thinking like there's a couple schools in New Orleans, I think this was in the news in maybe April, it was like an 8% suspension rate. That's like the number 2 high school in the state. Mastery in Italy has like a no excuses culture. Noble in Chicago has an extremely high rate. So kind of get aside to that. What are your thoughts on that?
So I just take the part about New Orleans real quick. So just to be really clear about that specific network of schools, I want data tells you what it wants you to know, right? And so we can hear that this is a high performance school, and it has an average of the 3 schools in this network a 63% suspension rate. And then they say our kids go to college. It doesn't tell you actually the kids who dropped out, who've been pushed out, who have voluntarily or voluntarily left. And so we have to be careful about what the story is being told and how it's being told about New Orleans. But I would say in terms of the fixed mindset piece, is that it is very important to know that change happens, and it will, but it's hard. And so you're going to come across people who will look at you like you are crazy, that you are too young to understand kids and what this business is about, right? So remember that you have your own purpose in that building, which is what you believe your purpose to be. And that other people might disagree with that, but you have to stay firm in that. What I would say, which may be different than what any of you might say, as a dean of culture, and I had that position, is that we were able to actually bring teachers to the table and to create the policies where people felt on both sides there was some compromise at what that was going to look like. So if the teachers don't feel like they have had a voice in the new way the school is going to operate, you're always going to have that kind of pushback. So think about ways in which you engage the teachers and the folks who don't really want to do this into the process of creating new systems for the school.
So I'm gonna go here. One quick thing I do want to say, because I've had experience when I worked in LA, the school district with the same problem. One suggestion, it was hard, my principal tasked me with an actual research on that topic. It was hard for me because I had to wait for a year to do it, and we collected qualitative and quantitative data. The quantitative data is all the data points you heard today. The qualitative data is we took down comments said in the teacher lounge, comments said in the classroom, comments that were written on cues. And we put that together in a PowerPoint with quantitative and qualitative. We obviously took names off those comments. It was very powerful to see those quotes up there and to say, this is what teachers on our campus have said. And granted, like obviously, I got a mixture of veteran and younger teachers too, so it wasn't just Jeremy's thing. And so trying to come at it that way so you can just look at the data as much as possible versus trying to get people like out of their mindsets or habits. Sorry, it's good.
Hi, my name is Warren Morgan, a new academic superintendent for Cleveland Metropolitan School District. And my question is geared towards the two of you. I forget the name, I'm sorry about that. But just transitioned out of the role, a principal role in Chicago Public Schools on the west side. I had to be advancing big into my school, but one of the roughest schools on the west side of Chicago. And so in that process of just cleaning up the school, turning it around, and we have restored justice, but we also made a lot of tough decisions, a lot of different things to clean things up so they weren't drastic fights, so there weren't kids all the way in the hallway. And when I think about this process of restorative justice, all these programs, and I thought about the budget every year that cut significantly. And so when I think about this work that's happening nationwide, I totally agree with the secretary. I love I was, reading through the new policy that Chicago Public Schools had happened. A lot of districts are doing across the country to kind of control this, but then I think about the schools that are still like Lee, or like that are just drastically toxic culture within the climate. Schools are trying to work to clean those up, but resources are continuing to be pulled out. Are you guys getting any data on those schools? Are there any suggestions further up about the amount of resources that need to be there? They need to be deemed culture. There need to be counseling and restorative justice when these things are constantly being pulled out of things.
That's something we hear a lot, and we agree. There's not enough resources, and that's the world that we're living in. But there are some resources that are available. We have a new grant program that's funded for FY14. It's another $50 million request for FY15 of school climate transformation grants, which it would scale up the positive behavior interventions and supports PBIS that has been mentioned. There's some other smaller programs, about $10 million for Project Prevent, which is focused on specifically schools that have had communities with pervasive violence and cycles of violence. There's another $75 million program that's just being stood up out of the Department of Justice, their National Institutes of Justice. It's a comprehensive school safety initiative. They're actually doing a interesting sort of research-based program studying new interventions in schools to better understand what works to keep schools safe and in positive learning environments, and then to help guide future funding. There's also some money for school resource officers. We know that there's some pros and cons on that as well. But those are some of the things. But we have asked for more. But that is a constant struggle. And one other thing I would say is that some schools have found success with partnerships with community organizations, and we know those organizations are also experiencing budget constraints, but the local social service agencies or partnering with local hospitals and having those kinds of partnerships can be effective as well.
And I can say at the district level too, it is really important that you protect that work at the budget table. Again, when we decided to revamp and do that new behavior education plan, there was no way that we can roll that out without giving additional resources and supports. And so again, there was some tough decisions made at the central office, but $1.5 million worth of both positions and professional development was pushed to the schools in order to support this work. So you can't have kind of unfunded district mandates or CMO mandates. You have to really make sure that your budget reflects your values and what you want to see happen in schools. For school leaders, you also have to make really good use of your resources. I've gone to schools and seen the psychologist on lunch duty. It's like, how about that? How about that? The person with the skills to work with your most critical students is on duty. So, making sure that you're making good use of the resources that you do have, the counselor, the psych, the social worker, the people who actually have the most expertise to work with that top tier students that are really giving you the flux, that should be their main priority. Not pushing paper, not being on duty, but providing direct supports to schools. So we try to do our part in central office, but we also try to hold our leaders accountable for being responsible for how they use those resources as well.
And just from the nonprofit lens, like I said earlier, there's a bunch of nonprofit organizations in cities across this country that want to work with schools, like the Juvenile Justice Project of Louisiana, and about 5 other school organizations in New Orleans that want to work with schools, who actually, quite frankly, get grant money to work with schools and just don't know how to access them. So here's a hint. Go to WKKelloggFoundation.org, which is a big foundation which is looking at the school to prison pipeline, and see who they fund and who they fund in your area, and then go to those organizations and say, hey, I'm looking for support in this area. This is how I can look. And then think differently about getting those resources in the school, right? Lots of universities have social work programs where those social work and training need hours, for a practicum. Reach out to those universities as another idea.
Not to DC, but there's a program that actually the department proposed called Raise the Top Opportunity, which acknowledges that there are tons of equity issues happening in our most needy schools that would give $300 million to schools like yours to do this exact kind of work and work that we know helps kids succeed. It's not yet funded by Congress, so I'll just put that out there that it's something that we really could need to be a great source of funds for this kind of work.
Okay. So I want to make sure we have a lot, we may not get all, so try to be as concise as possible with your questions. I'm going to go here, then here, and come back. Now we have a lot more, yes.
You just need to stand up.
Mine's not a question for I think that as someone who's been a part of the program for now almost 16 years, when he said veteran teachers at 13 years old, I want to be honest with ourselves. that for many years, we were all, in many of these rooms, told that zero tolerance was the way to go. So it's not just these other teachers, you know, these teachers that don't care. So my school is about 50% CFA alums. And we did find that a lot of these things seemed to work when we were still in middle school. But as the problems got bigger, challenges got greater, these same strategies don't work in high school. And so it's really difficult to convince us, who we are always like, we want the best for the kids, of course we care about them, we do all these things, we do go extra mile, to say, wait a minute, maybe this approach isn't working, because it's working now, but it's not working for them later on in life, and it's not working. So I just kind of want us to all just be honest with ourselves too, and I have worked at those charter schools where, and I was one of those people, that snaps about somebody who's not having a uniform, or not having this, or not having that. And as the years have gone by, and seeing who finishes college and all those things, I myself have begun to question, you know, was that the right message? But now I feel like I have to undo that for so many people, so I just want to go back.
And there's organizations like JPL.org out there to help teachers and schools undo some of those messages.
Thank you.
I actually might have a question that might go along with what you're saying. So, Ariel Murphy, I'm a fifth grade writing teacher in Genesee. So, right now, my school, I think, is going in one of our big rocks right now is trying to figure out how to help our parents and students understand or make it through the transition between elementary and middle school, which in our charter school network, the problem is we have, I think, at the elementary school level, we give the students a lot of chances or opportunities to correct their behavior or to understand what's going on, or you get a demerit, what we might call a demerit, but then you can, like, you know, you can take those away or something like that. We have systems like that in elementary. In middle school, we're finding that, and then of course, as you know, the kids get older and the problems get more difficult, there are fewer opportunities, I think, for the students to have those chances to correct their behavior, whatever that might be. So, curious about suggestions that you might have about like helping both students and parents to kind of make it through that transition, or to kind of understand, or how to make that transition smoother, I guess, for our families, to understand, you know, and maybe it has to do with the school and how we might have to reevaluate that, and I think that's my suggestion on going back to the school with, but curious about what you all think could be done in a situation like that.
I'll tell you the parent piece. One of the things we've done at my school is use the guidance counselor to support parent workshops. And this past year, our parents, a good core group of our parents read the text Love and Logic, and basically learn different parenting skills. And embedded in that, part of the messaging was from me to the guidance counselor and to the sessions that I sat in. It's like, all right, ultimately we want you to use this experience to help your child be more successful in school. And I obviously don't want to just promote that text. It's more about finding a forum for your parents to be a part of the conversations that are going on about school discipline in your school.
But some of the policies in middle school you're saying are just more strict, right?
Right.
So you're giving less chances at middle school, right? So that's more of a policy thing, you know, right? So whoever wrote that code of conduct or whoever put those policies in place decided that we're going to get tough in middle school, you know, because we want to get them ready. You know, we had that conversation. There were some people who say, well, by 4th and 5th grade, we should get tougher. So by the time they get to middle school, then they'll be ready. Like, what are you talking about? You know, so you have to take an approach as the leaders especially to really teach the adults about this. So the same way we're going to teach the students about the behavior, you have to go back and really teach, you know, the adults. If you know middle schoolers and you know anything about adolescent development, and their frontal lobe is still not developed, they don't make good decisions. They just don't. But if you know that about a kid and about where they are developmentally, then you can see why they need so many chances, right? So you're asking them to get it right the first time, and you don't even get it right the first time, right? So so, you know, you have to give them the same generosity and spirit that you want as an adult. They make mistakes all the time, right? But you still want your job, you know, and so, you know, right? You know, you late, you know, I should have a zero tolerance policy, you know, as a principal. You late, you find another job, you know, so, zero tolerance, right? So, you know, and clearly, I like to be screaming too, you know, we can't beat each other up around this, right? Like she said, we all did it when I was on the west side. You know, in my first year, I suspended kids. I'd be lying to tell you, oh, I never suspended kids. So it's really taking, you know, a hard look, being honest, not shaming people, but teaching them. When you know better, do better. They need more chances because their brain is not developed.
And if you contact Jelon McNeil, Yahoo.com, the organization I work for, actually has developed a scope and sequence in terms of adolescent development and behavior. Because what we find is, like, just in that, we haven't helped kids or teachers or even parents know here are our expectations based on adolescent development. So we don't even set goals around it. So Jelon McNeil at Yahoo.com, you can email it to me and I will share that document with you. It goes from pre-K to 12th grade.
There actually just is, in that directory of resources that we mentioned, there is actually an online course for school leaders, for training leaders and school climate teams. So that's just also, there's a bunch of things like that, and that they can guide conversations or having that conversation about the policy and then how you look at the data. So that could be a helpful tool.
All right, so there was one, it was here, and here, and that's it. But I need you guys to be concise, please, stick to time, so concise, please, so we can get these last three.
Absolutely, I've had a lot of time to think, so I'll be concise. Atera Griffin, Baltimore, 2011 core. I work at the Baltimore Leadership School for Young Women. I'm Dean of Students. My second year in this position, this school is transitioning. We're moving into our 6th year in existence. Changed principals, so we have a new principal who had to come in and create a new culture, but that culture creation actually fell into my lap. I have the job of making sure that the policies and procedures are clear for all of the parents and the students and the teachers. The question I really have is for schools that are growing, and this really goes to Curtis, a growing school that has to really make sure that the culture and the climate and the policies and procedures are clear enough for our students and parents to understand, and I guess general enough to go consistently throughout the years as we continue to grow. How do you message to the staff in particular how to implement these policies and procedures properly for students to understand, and how do you connect that with the parents so that they understand how to work with the school in partnership to make sure that it's a continuum between the school culture and climate and policies and procedures and what they're actually doing at home?
So when you're correctly, how you message it to staff members, and then how you messaging it to kids and families and growing as a school. So I think you're gonna have to first be very blunt and honest that you don't have everything worked out. These are like the structures and systems that you have in the school, but there's definitely room for growth. That buys you an opportunity actually to fail and make mistakes, as Nancy was saying. But it also is like the brutal, honest truth about this work. And there is no silver bullet. There is no like exact answer for this, but it is. It should be messaged that way, and it should also be messaged in a supportive way. I found that my teachers are like excited to like get feedback when they know like I'm not just trying to like counsel you out of your job if you fail with this. Like I'm actually trying to support you so you can be as successful as possible in your classroom. So I think it's that dual focus in the messaging. For parents and kids, I think for both of them, you just gotta give them the big idea. Like let them know like. I started a few weeks of my K orientation, like, my goal is to get your kid to a great high school ultimately. So like, there are gonna be times you're gonna hate me, you're gonna curse me out, and all that other stuff, but like, ultimately, like, what we're trying to do here is trying to get your child to a good high school. In my case, in my school, there are obviously different focuses for other folks, but like, message that, keep messaging the big picture. Like, why are we doing it? There's a reason, a rationale as to like why are we doing this, and we could probably talk offline about like how to have specifics, so we can practice talk offline about those specific conversations.
Sure.
Yeah, my school, New York, middle school. My school, I'm usually the voice too, and I actually had our school turned around a lot in 2 years, just like without everybody on board. I heard in a lot of CTA sessions, people getting hung up on getting everybody on board. It's a little unrealistic. But our school was able to move forward with a real change, with largely most of, really a great percentage of the staff on board, and just minimizing the voice of the ones who weren't. And it didn't cost much money. And then we instituted uniforms, and we had a motto, we had zero tolerance, but our version of zero tolerance was, there were teachers who wore the school uniform shirt, and when a kid didn't have one, they gave it to them. Like teachers literally took the shirt on the back and gave it to them.
Okay, last question, and then we're gonna close.
Good afternoon, my name is Tony Sutton, assistant principal at DC Prep. So we are, one of those no excuse schools, and so there's like how do you, what offer support, guidance you have of the trade-offs that I imagine have to occur, allowing these kids between kind of living down those roads, also at the same time recognizing and experiencing the fact that if I give this student a lot of support, a lot of love, those kids who don't love the most, like just really, really invest in that student, that they can turn around without suspensions, without intentions. But again, like that's a lot of time. So it's kind of what is your guidance for negotiating those trade-offs?
I'm sorry, it's 4 years. Sorry.
I haven't had to deal with that at my school. We didn't have to negotiate because it was so low performing that it was, let's try this out, we piloted it, it started doing better, but not with it. So if I was at, are you saying you're at a school with zero tolerance and it's working for most kids?
Yeah, we have pretty good results for kids.
Yeah, I can't speak to that.
Well, here's the thing. When I worked in a school that was, actually it was DC Prep, to be honest. When I worked in DC Prep and I found that the school culture and the messages that I thought we were giving kids didn't sit well with me, I left. Because there was no negotiation in that for me. And so sometimes as the adult, we actually have to make a decision about whether or not this is a good fit for me to be in the school and find a school that fits better, that aligns better with your own purpose, right? When I spent the year in DC Prep, it was quite difficult to negotiate. This is when it was the first campus, and we were expanding from 4th and 5th to 6th and 7th, and so we created the Senior Academy, and it was difficult. Just to be straight up, it was difficult every day to live in a system that I didn't actually believe in. And so that's all after you actually. Like, you have to make a decision about whether or not that's where you're going to be.
Yeah, we'll close and go ahead.
I basically, my school is not a no excuses school, it's no excuses arguments, but we're not a no excuses school at all. But I would encourage you, like my litmus test for all of my teachers is like, what I want my kid in this class or this school. And not until recently when my wife and I welcomed the baby, I'm like really thinking hard about this. So in 4 years, I'm going to be putting my kid, my son, in hopefully a great school. And I think I would encourage you to have that gut check as we talk. Right. As you go through this year, have that gut check and do it often. Like really sit down and think about it, look at the numbers, look past the numbers, the data and the programs, and think, is this really helping 100% of my kids get to our ultimate goal, or in that case, to be college, preparatory, high school, or college.
All right, so last question for our panel, 1 minute. In your opinion, what is the single most important thing that school leaders and teachers can do to ensure and promote inclusiveness and equity in our school discipline practices? Single most important thing. And who would like to start? Okay.
I would say in my experience, it really depends on where your school is and their transformation and addressing this issue. I think systems and structures have to come first. If your school does not have systems and structures in place, that's where we started. And I think that really gets you so far. And a couple people asked questions about how do you even get it started. And with me, piloting just one grade level, one classroom, whatever it takes to just get that ball rolling. But now we're at a place where I think it's really about adults examining bias. We still have discrepancy in our suspension rates for different ethnic groups at my school. We haven't tackled that yet. Our ground floor was just the systems and structures to get us out of the hole. Now it's to take that next level, and it's actually going to be a lot harder to do this work, but I think that's the next step. So it really depends on where your school is.
I would say echo something Nancy said earlier, when you know better, you do better. So learn more about the things that impact our kids that they bring into the classroom that may impact their behavior, and then learn the alternatives to get them to the outcomes you want. And then you'll do that.
This may sound a little hokey, but I would say that you really let all of your kids know, especially the kids that you love the most, let them know that you care about them and that you love them. And I say that because recently I was in the airport flying back to something with my wife and kid, and like a tall kid ran up to me and was like, "Hey, Mr. Palmore!" And this was a kid who I taught a long time ago, like 10, 12 years ago, and he was like, "Hey," I was like, "How you doing?" And he was like, "I'm doing really well." And long story short, he had a really tough experience, and I was like, and I said the generic thing, I knew he was going to do well, because he turned things around. And he was like, "For real?" He was like, "I really wish you had told me that a long time ago." And really said in my head, this is something that we have to do. We have to communicate through all these systems, all these structures. We gotta let these kids know ultimately we care about them. This is a space where we love you and we want you to be successful.
I would say have courage, be really courageous. This work is not always popular, so you have to have the courage to really stand up for it. Sometimes in places where if people don't think that it's worthwhile, and also be open to thinking differently. The New Orleans and talking to Kira Owens-Jones and this idea that there can be a third way or another way. It's not zero tolerance or bust, and that the ends don't always justify the means, and that you can do really good work for kids in a really damaging way, and just let that sit with you and realize that if we think out of the box a little bit, that there can be another way to accomplish the aggressive ends that we want without damaging families and kids in the process.
I just really think that, as it's already been mentioned, investing in your teachers and giving them the training and the skills and the professional opportunities to not only learn and be, in trainings and whether it's curriculum or restorative justice, whatever it might be, but also to have that time as adults to hash this stuff out. Because I've so often found that teachers feel that their voices are silenced in the process, and when you get, our biggest lesson in piloting this restorative justice work in our school has been that when you let teachers talk about this, they're gonna, however hard or easy it is, they're gonna talk about it and they're gonna go somewhere with it. And creating those spaces for teachers, because in the end, we can have these curriculums, but if you can't rely on the people to implement them, then you're throwing your money at stuff that's not going to show up in your school culture.
I would probably go to systems and structures point. All of you are operating within a charter school or district or CMO that has a set of rules that dictates what you can do in the classroom. So where those structures are not helping kids, I would say be an advocate to change them. And we are seeing massive change across this country that is so exciting in regards to discipline. LA, Chicago, all over North Baltimore, and tap into that reform wave, see the things that could work for your school, for your district, and really try to be an agent of change there.
And I would agree with everything I just heard, and I would say, I'm just inspired by the science and the questions and the care in this room, and I think it's just the bottom line is it's possible. There is a lot of change happening, and a lot of people showing that this can be done. So thank you for your attention and care about this issue.
Awesome. One thing I would say too, to close out is, and this kind of gets to your question a little bit, when I became principal, I took over a school that had a very strict sort of no-nonsense culture. But what I was noticing in how it was being enforced, I had a lot of this concern when we looked at the data and numbers. And so one thing that I said, you know what, I think we're being lazy around things that, everything that they just said. I mean, I just literally wrote down like 60 things, and I didn't capture it all, and that we weren't necessarily doing. And so, for me, you know, we went to this training, you know, whatever it takes with before, but what was powerful about the training is they showed a video. And in one video, they showed how the average school acts when something happens to a student, whether it's an academic or behavior, and how there's this sort of negative interaction with the parent-kid. And then they showed this video of a school that's proactive. That at every level, it's just a different mindset, that it's like the military, right? No one is left behind. And it really opened my eyes in that year. We got a committee together to say, okay, what, you know, it's one thing that we want to make sure we have a safe school, but it's another thing when we're being this pyramid of prevention and being proactive. We set up this pyramid of prevention and set up the mindset that no child is going to be left behind, and that we're good. Like, I want to get to 0 suspensions and all these detentions. Like, this is on us as leaders, and we need to take it and own it. This is not our kids. And our kids are coming to us with so many different challenges, and if we are not taking the time to get to know them individually and figure out what is driving that, that is on us. And so we totally changed our structure. We took a pyramid of prevention, tied it to our RTI structure, and made it part of the school policy. And literally suspensions and everything just dropped. And so, you know, there's these creative ways that everybody gave today. And I encourage you to think about them and just think, how can we do better as leaders to train each other, train our staff around the other options that are out there. I think, you know, there's a lot of, we know this historically, this institutionalized racism in our country going back to slavery that still exists in very subtle ways. And so in very subtle ways that as leaders and as staff, we don't want this to happen, but we could be reinforcing the culture of power that has alienated our children. And there's a mainstream culture that devalues our children's language and cultures. And there's just subtle things that we say that our kids begin to group us as part of that mainstream culture. Absolutely. And so if we're not aware of that, or we're not thinking about that, or reflecting on that, then it's really hard to motivate that child. And so I'm going to close with this quote from Ralph Ellison, who's one of my favorite writers, that I think gets at some of the underlying hidden pieces that is causing these numbers that we see. If you can show me how I can cling to that which is real to me, while teaching him a way into the larger society, then I will not only drop my defenses and my hostility, but I will sing your praises, and I will help the desert make fruit. So I think we're all here because we love our children and care about them deeply in our communities. I want to thank you for your time that you committed today to listen and think about the solutions. I want to thank our panelists. You guys are amazing.